Catalog and Cocktails presented by Data.World. It's your honest, no BS, non-salesy conversation about enterprise data management with tasty beverages in hand. I'm Tim Gasper, product guy, customer guy at Data.World, joined by Juan Cicada.
Hello. I'm Juan Cicada, principal scientist at Data.World, and we're back, season 6, year 4. I can't believe
it. Dang, congratulations.
Thank you.
Or condolences. I'm not sure which, but
this is exactly where Tim and I was like, can't believe we're doing this. Like it's again, and I can't believe we're doing this again. And I don't know,
let me ask you, how from when you started the podcast to today, is the mission still the same? Are you guys still having fun? I'm turning the podcast back on to you guys, but I'm very curious. It's a long time for a podcast.
Yeah. So, but hold on. Who is this person who's talking to us right now?
I'm Joe Reis. How you doing?
How you doing, Joe?
Welcome, Joe.
Joe, this is the first time we have a repeat guest, and as I wrote on LinkedIn, the three of us we bumped into each other in Snowflake, and we were having beers, and we're like, this is a good conversation. Let's just do some of the podcast. And I think Tim and I were honestly when are we going to start the podcast again? I don't know. Maybe we should just do this with Joe, kick it off. And I think we were going to do it last week, but you couldn't do it. So then we decided to do it this week. That's how it goes. That's the honest, no BS about it. So it works. Back to your question. We just like doing it. What has been our mission, Tim? I don't know.
Well, we wanted an excuse to drink at 4:00 Central on Wednesdays. But then secondly, and most importantly, it's just been about learning, right? I think we've been wanting to meet people, have interesting conversations. And really, we've always been thinking, man, the best conversations are the ones that happen on the side of the stage, not the ones that are happening on the stage. And so that's kind of that mission continues. And we get to have great conversations with folks like yourself, Joe, and talking about what's really going on in data.
Well, I'm happy and sad for you. So,
well, here we go. Well, so let's kick it off. What are we drinking? What are we toasting for, Joe?
Well, to your success, obviously, as a 4-year show. I mean, I think that's what we should be drinking to. That's pretty awesome. So.
But you've been doing this also for many years now, too.
Yeah. What year is it? 2023. Yeah. 3-ish years. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, a lot of this started as kind of a COVID project, right? Because I don't think I would have gotten into podcasting if it weren't for COVID. Because I think, but back then, I think everyone's mindset was still very provincial and localized, right? And so I just did it because why the hell not? I have nothing else to do, and so if you guys were doing it probably a year before, and then It's a cool thing to do, though. And it seems like everyone has podcasts. I was joking the other day, all of my phone calls are basically just podcasts right now, when I talk to people. So
there's a lot of podcasts going on now.
One of the things I'm pretty proud is that if you go to listennotes.com, they're an aggregator, and we're actually on the top 2.5% of all global podcasts. That is, really? They aggregate over 3 million podcasts. So that's cool. All right. So what are you drinking, Tim?
I'm actually on vacation right now. I'm in Dripping Springs, Texas. There is a dripping spring in Dripping Springs.
I know. I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's literally a spring that drips. It's the craziest thing. So
I'm here with my family. We like to hang out and with somebody else's pool, steal somebody's pool. But there's a distillery close by here called Treaty Oak that I really like. This is their Ghost Hill bourbon. That's really solid. So if you're ever in the Austin area, drive 25 minutes out, stop by Treaty Oak. But actually, the thing I'm drinking right now is actually a peached julep cocktail. So that's what I got going on over here.
It's fancy.
Yeah. And I'm having, there's some nice rum, Flor de Caña, and it's nice and hot outside here in Texas. So I'm having just some sparkling water with some bitters. Nice, refreshing. Nice. And I think it's just going to cheers to us having podcasts and people actually paying attention to us. So
cheers, Joe.
That's awesome. Congrats. Yeah, and that's what the Listen Notes thing's awesome. I'm just drinking a Diet Red Bull, because why not? Gotta watch my figure. So.
All right, a quick warm-up question. So modeling in semantics is all about representation. So what object would you choose that represents you the best?
So it was a bit of a doozy of a question. So I actually asked ChatGPT what ChatGPT would represent itself as, and it came back as a library or a database full of information. So that's kind of interesting. I'm either yeah, I don't know, probably a meme or something. So my goal in life is actually to become a meme of myself, and so I think that might be how I represent myself. How about you guys?
I like that. That's actually a good kind of a meta response. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking maybe I'm like a pencil, and like creating, but iterating and flexible. It's got an eraser, right? You screw up, you can erase it. So yeah, maybe I'm a pencil.
It's cool.
What about you, Juan?
I'm gonna go with like I can't find the objects. I'm just curious. I just got to talk to people, got to learn, right, and just go. What would that object be?
So like a sponge.
There you go.
You soak things up. Yeah.
Or a microphone.
Yeah, or a microphone.
A microphone, like
or a recorder. Or something like that. Or a sponge that picks up like the eraser bits when you're done. Tim's done
after I make a mess, you can clean it up.
So,
all right.
A mop. That's what he is.
All right, let's get into this. Okay, so we were having this conversation with beers, and it was
a lot of beers, by the way, too. It was kind of funny.
It was pretty.
So shout out to Ethan, Aaron, and the all the people involved in the low key happy hour in Vegas a couple weeks ago at Snowflake Summit.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Made a sneak appearance for that night, and that was super cool. It's kind of like a who's who of the data industry, just walking around, bumping into everybody. We bumped into each other, and
we started talking about this. Well, first of all, start talking about you're writing a new book. So
yeah,
you have a very famous book right now. Which how is that going? And now you're writing a new book, and tell us about that, because that's how we got a conversation.
Yeah, I got a famous book, Fundamentals of Data Engineering, that's been doing really, really well. But after that, there's one chapter in the book I actually didn't really feel like I did the topic of data modeling justice. And I kept getting a lot of comments and emails about that chapter in particular, like, "Oh, why didn't you cover this? Why didn't you cover that?" Or like, "Why did you cover this at all? Like, nobody cares about this." And so it was kind of a spectrum of response. And I'm like, yeah, I do agree. I think that maybe the topic of data modeling needs to be looked at maybe a bit more closely, and also probably resurrected to some degree. If you ask, especially newer practitioners to the data field right now, and you ask them about data modeling, you get a variety of answers in terms of what they think that is. But for the most part, it feels like a lot of the, not just the tactical practices. Everyone thinks of data modeling as like Kimball or, something like that, relational modeling. And I think those are certainly techniques, but the art, the philosophy, and really the why of data modeling and why you want to do it, I think that's been lost to an entire new generation of data practitioners. So as I started thinking about this more, I'm like, well, maybe I should write a book on this. And, I started thinking a lot about it. And, later last year, decided to start writing it. I wanted to be done by now, actually. And I thought it'd be done. But a few things happened. The very famous book also meant that I started making courses, which take up a lot of time. So that's been I think a blessing, obviously. And then large language models. I think the popularity of AI right around kind of November, December of last year and into now, it's red hot. And I think for a lot of data professionals, that also meant, you're rethinking a lot of, okay, so maybe not rethinking, but you're thinking, okay, so what does this mean for the industry? What does it mean for what we've been doing? Does it change anything? And if so, what changes? And are we ready for this? I think that's the other question, right? That was a question that we were talking about actually, over many, many beers. Was it feels like there's this mad rush into AI right now. But we all work in data. We all see data sets every day. And I don't know about you, but the ones that I see, they could be better, to put it politely, and to put it more bluntly, a lot of more flaming trash heaps. And so to try and put AI on top of this, I think is it's an interesting idea. I'm very curious how it works out. But I see this as a huge opportunity for the field right now. Either we can start getting the fundamentals correct again, semantics, which is Juan's territory, data modeling, which is what I've been thinking about. These are very, very much related, right? These are basically siblings. And we have a chance to get this right, which means the promises of AI can be achieved for real. But if we can't get this right, I feel like a lot of the interest and investment and frenzy around AI does have a chance of actually backfiring on itself. So love your take on this.
There's a divergence here between thinking that AI is going to allow us to kind of forget about the fundamentals and say, oh, well, now we can kind of zoom straight to the finish line. Or there's a perspective of, oh, shoot, the problems that we have around our semantics, around our modeling, around our data quality, around the access around data, those things are going to be amplified by this movement. And it's going to be even a worse situation than it was before. And I don't know how many people are in the middle of that spectrum versus, I know you faced a little bit of even controversy as you talked about wanting to write this book around semantics and modeling, right? And people kind of are like, either, oh my gosh, I love it, we need this book, or why are we spending time on this right now?
So one of the things that comes to mind.
We'll talk more about that.
Sorry, is when we talk about AI, I think right now, we use the word AI and it's always been machine learning. And now we use the word AI and now it's LLMs and generative AI, right? So we just kind of shift what the word AI is. And now if we look underneath what it is, the input to that stuff, we always say, oh, data quality, all that stuff. But like, at least for the large language models, which is what our current definition of AI, it's text, it's unstructured. And now we're going to go to images and the multi-model stuff, but it's really not about structured data yet. And I think so we're seeing all this excitement around that stuff, but I think there's like, hey, folks, like, you want to go tie in your internal data to this whole ChatGPT and stuff, but that's structured data. And now I think the argument is that, oh, there's always way more unstructured and text and all that stuff, and that's what we should go focus on. I would actually argue that I mean, that's true. I would argue that the structured data, smaller than it is for the unstructured, has more value. And I think would solve more of the questions people have than just the unstructured. That's I'll put that claim out there, put that position out there, and happy to get pushed back from it. Now, when we start doing that, we start focusing on the structured side, then we're like, how do you put in structured into your LLMs? And we look at all the trainings on vector databases and how to do the embeddings and all that stuff. Like, it's not about structured data into itself. And I think that, and so if we want to start putting structured data combined with these large language models and generative AI, this is where the modeling semantics is going to kind of And right now we're not talking about it. And I think it's a fundamental part that we need to do. So anyways, that's kind of my opening rant here.
To you, Joe. Completely agree with your opening round, right? It is the blind spot right now. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. You know, if you talk to people like Bill Inman, right? He's working on text data. That's what he's cared about for a long time. If you talk to him, it's like the data warehouse that he came up with back in the day. Like he doesn't really think about that very much. It's like that's pretty old hat. Text is, I think to this point that there's a large amount of text data in a lot of companies, and deriving meaning from that is important. But tying that back to those systems of record that you're talking about, those rows and columns of very valuable operational data, right, that businesses need and live and breathe off of. Like that's, if you can tie all this stuff together, that's amazing. That's powerful, right? And all the images you collect and tying that back to, all the data in your ERP system and whatever, whatever other data you have. I mean, tying this all together, I think if you can do that, that's cool. Like we've achieved something that we've been trying to do as an industry for a very, very, very long time. And like, I'm bullish on that. I think angle, right? And if we can get there, that's cool. But you have to be realistic too and understand like what's in between here and that vision, right? And so,
all right. So let's dive into the data modeling part. So where are we right now with it? And give us a sneak peek of what's going through your brain that you're trying to put it down as paper. So.
Yeah, some things that come to mind. So there's a talk I kind of debuted it in Vancouver a few weeks ago called Data Modeling is Dead, Long Live Data Modeling. And so it really comes back to the premise that as an industry, we've sort of lost our way with respect to having, I think, a coherent view of data with the perspective of business processes, rules, vocabulary, semantics, and so forth, right? We're so used to capturing or seeing modeling as really an exercise of capturing ad hoc queries at this point, and I think responding to ad hoc requests, that we've really lost sight of the bigger picture in terms of, I think, the grander data modeling practices, like conceptual modeling, for example, then logical modeling, then physical modeling, right? It's like there's a couple of threads to this. One is I think we're so focused on the tactical, we've just lost everything else, all perspective and the context. The other part of this is it's because, and I hear this often, like, modern data stack, especially, I like it a lot, it's achieved a lot, but one of the challenges is you can throw a computer at anything. And so when I talk to analytics engineers, for example, they're like, well, I can just throw more compute at stuff, so why would I need to model it? And I'm like, you could throw a lot of compute at stuff, but do you understand what it is you're trying to model in the first place and how it fits into the bigger picture? And then you zoom out across the spectrum, and ignoring analytics, for example, which is our domain, all of us. You talk to software engineers. It's the same thing, except they're the ones creating the data that the analysts and the machine learning engineers depend upon in a lot of cases. And it's even worse in software engineering. The notions of data modeling, it's for a lot of software engineers I talk to, it's non-existent. You're talking about event streams, for example. It's just like I package whatever I need to package into an event, throw it off, you consume it, there you go, have a nice day, right? And if you have a database, a lot of databases these days are managed by ORMs, object relational mappers, right? So if you've ever written like a Rails app or a Django app, for example, or many other languages, Node, whatever, it's like ORMs are great. They also give you so much flexibility that your database can basically implode on itself if you're not careful about your model that you're creating. So what I see there is people will make models according to, say, a form that they built or a web interface or something, and that's sort of the quote model. And so this is, but again, this is where the data is going to first. It's created, and then obviously analysts pull whatever they can, and so it's this cascading effect, right? And like I think when we talk about modeling, it's like, how do you model across the data lifecycle? How do you think about the coherence of business concepts, rules and processes and so forth you're trying to capture in the data, across whether it's application, analytics, machine learning, streams, whatever, right? I think that's a huge piece I think we're missing. And the other part I'm looking at is like, if I look over here, there's data modeling books. I have Todd's books, I have Kimball, blah, 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 but it's like Datavault and so forth. But there hasn't been, like, I think, an evolution in thinking in data modeling for over 20 years now. The last big one was Datavault, right? And since then, I think there's been some attempts, but but I think they're too focused on particular silos and don't expand the picture to see data as a whole, which I think, especially with AI right now, I think it gives us a chance to see data as a whole. I don't see why you would need to silo it, but these are things that are on my mind. Again, some of these ramblings are I think somewhat coherent. Some of them I'm still thinking about, but this is what's on my mind. That's what you asked. And so, yeah.
All right, Tim, you want to go first? And let's pick this apart. I got a couple thoughts. What you go first?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. No, I want to start with a follow-up question, Joe, which is what's the biggest risk that we run here? Do you think it's is it a productivity risk? Is it a cost risk? Like, what do you think are the biggest walls we're running into by not thinking enough about modeling?
I think the risk is that we're going to do dumb things more quickly. So you'll get the sense you'll get the hallucination that you're productive.
Fail faster.
You'll fail faster. Well, you just may do dumb things more quickly, but you won't even know you're failing, right? Until it's too late. Yeah, because I think what you're going to see giant productivity gains, but at the end of the day, did you gain much? So that's it, because I think one of the big problems we have right now is obviously large language models are they're great. Super, what they do, they generalize really well. They're also black box solutions. So you have no idea what happens to them. You have no idea if the output is correct. Obviously, things like knowledge graphs, for example, there's a lot of research going on where that might solve that hallucination problem. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But the problem is if we don't start at least having this conversation in terms of, I think, data correctness, for example, what does it mean? The risk is that we actually do things too well while doing things too badly. if that makes sense. We'll have the impression that we're doing things awesomely, but then it'll be entirely wrong. So
yeah. Well, and I like your comment and your tie into generative AI as well, because I think sometimes, even now, right, we're very enamored by the magic of it all, and we're just like, wow, look, it wrote the SQL query, great. Like, can we just have generative AI write all our DBT for us? Like, is that a good thing? Probably not. It's an interesting productivity hack, but.
But you got to know what to look for. That's what I mean by you could be doing things. You could be doing a lot of things, but you could be doing them all wrong. How would you ever, if you didn't know what to look for in a SQL query that it outputs? How would you know that it's right or wrong? I mean, it's pretty. So I do this with my kids a lot with homework, right? So we use ChatGPT quite often, and it's just to check homework. And I'm like, but sometimes it gets it wrong, and I'm like, so you need to check GPT's answer and tell me why it's wrong now. So, and I think that, to bring it to like education, for example, we're all educators, for example. And I think that's, one way I think teaching is going to change is, you're going to have to teach to people how to validate stuff in the future. Right. But this comes back to business. How do you know? So if a CEO types into, the new generative AI BI tool, because everyone wants that, or the catalog, for example, and it's like, how do you know the data is right? How do you know the output's right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think the education part is critical here, and which is, no pun intended, we need to be more critical. And I think, and this is not just an AI thing. I mean, I was was organizing a roundtable like last month about it. People were bringing this up, and somebody said, "We've been saying, I just read it on the internet." Right. And then you're just saying these things out there too. Right. So it's like the whole being more critical is something that is not just now. Right. It's been going on for a long time. And I think every generation can argue that the next generation is
so stupid. Yeah.
Yeah. So forth. Right. But still, we should kind of I think being critical thinking is a key thing here. Now, I love this quote. Tim, we got to do our T-shirt store one day. This one will say, "Do dumb things more quickly, but you don't know you're failing." I like that. Joe quote like that. What the meaning part, right? Goes back to, I was having a conversation today. Like, data literacy is a topic. I have my rant about this is I hate people using the word data literacy because that means that people are illiterate in data. I'm like, that's not true. People are not illiterate in data, actually. And we call the business side needs to get data literacy. Like, the business side actually knows their own data and their own business. Like, they may not know all the tools and all the techniques for doing statistics and stuff, but they know their data. They know what they care about it. Go down to the data side. They're the ones who have that one. I would argue they're business illiterate. Like, they need.
Yeah.
So this is my call all the time, is that we need to, the folks who are managing the data, they need to understand how I'm using the word business, but it's just, they understand how their domain means.
Yeah.
So, and again, this goes back to education, and that's where modeling comes in, because modeling and semantics, I'm going to just bundle these two things together, because modeling is just a way to understand these semantics, the meaning of what we're talking about. I mean, you got a green board behind you. Like, if we're going to go start talking about something and we're confused, like, we end up just going to the green board right there and start drawing things out. And guess what? It's probably going to look like bubbles and lines. And guess what? That looks like a model, a data model or something, right? So and I think the other issue is that as technologists, we just don't like to talk to people. Just want to go code, and like, well, I got the form and I see the code for that, and I can create a package of that which is in JSON and just send that, and then I get that, and I'm going to go store it, and then I'm done, and then I'm going to just dump that into a database, and there it is, and now go do your analytics on it, and then somewhere else, people saying, I want my data to look this way, and so they're basically creating a new UI form for the end result. Now transform it. So you're just doing a bunch of syntactic transformations and say, okay, this thing now fits here, but you don't know if that was the correct thing. And because just go talk to people. So anyways, I think the right here is the modeling is all about the people side, which is, we don't like to talk about people because we're technologists. That needs to change.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because, I like to punish myself and go on Reddit once in a while and look at the data engineering subreddit. I very rarely post there. I mean, and it's great people and stuff, but you see posts like the other day, somebody's posting, well, do I need to use Kimball modeling, or do I just, and I'm like, well, what's your alternative? Like, if you're not going to do that, then because if a lack of modeling is still modeling, it's just like a really crappy model. You're still trying to represent the reality that's in your head. It's just Kimball, I think, gave you a really good way of doing it for analytics. I mean, it works, and it's worked for decades. So my answer would be, do you think you're smart enough to reinvent the wheel in this case? I mean, against something that works. I mean, if you want to, go for it. But I'm not saying. The other approach I'm taking too is I don't think that there's one single way to model, right? I think that's one of the big mistakes we make as an industry, and that's why I posted the post the other night, about like it feels like there's religious wars in modeling. I think it is true to some degree, right? There's various factions. The relational camp has been hammering on that for 50, 60 years now, 60 years almost. Dimensionally, analytics has its own, sectors and stuff. My whole approach is like, pick what worked for your situation. Just understand the tools available to you. So the analogy I'm giving right now is mixed martial arts, right? Like before UFC 1, or actually before I would say Bruce Lee with Jeet Kune Do, but anyway, UFC 1 is what really came to a head with mixed martial arts. But it was like until then, if you guys grew up in the 80s, which I think a lot of you did, it was like, there's always like the kung fu master who had the secret art that was the most powerful thing in the world, but he would never show you because, if you looked at you, you would die or something like that. And then but the question was always what would happen if like Mike Tyson and Bruce Lee got into a fight, right? Or a wrestler and Bruce Lee or whatever, Hulk Hogan and Mike Tyson get into a fight. Like, these are the questions, right? But it started actually being realistically answered in the 90s with UFC. And you come to find out that there is no one true martial art. There's a bunch of them, and you got to know all of them. And you got to know when to apply them. And to me, that's no different than data modeling across the data lifecycle. You need to understand the different techniques that have been around forever. You need to know the new techniques and be willing to apply them to new situations. And that, I think, is going to bring about a new era of, just how we deal with data and how we talk about data, how we use it, et cetera. But until we bridge that gap, we're operating in so many damn silos right now. It's holding us back. That's the crazy thing. We like to think we're making progress, but you look to your left, software engineers, you look to your right, whoever the hell is consuming your data, it's like everyone's operating their own silo, but it's all on the same sort of data that flows through. It just changed, i.e. modeled differently, but it still carries the same concepts hopefully through, right? And so we need to get back to that notion. But I think we need to get rid of these stupid, idiotic, battles about like the one true way. Like I have a book, 50 Years of Relational Databases, from Chris Date. And that whole book is him just like pretty much trash talking anybody who doesn't agree with the relational model. 300 pages of this crap. Good book, but I think it's symptomatic of, an old school mentality that if you're not with us, like you're absolutely an enemy of us. Right?
You're either a part of the religion or you're not. I like this analogy you're using around mixed martial arts, and it's not like, Brazilian jiu-jitsu also always wins or Taekwondo always wins. Right. It's knowing what techniques apply to which and knowing your opponent. And, this makes me think about, lately there's been some buzz around things like activity stream and things like big wide tables and things like that. Like, what do you think about some of these? Like, here's a clever approach, to solve a lot of use cases. Are those just other tools in the toolkit?
I think there's other tools in the toolkit, honestly. Activity stream. I saw that come out. I was like, that's cool. I think it fits, what Materialize is doing, for example, like that or activity schema, but I think that's dope. If it works for them, then it works for them. Right. My whole thing is just to know what the trade-offs are. What's a trade-off? If you take this technique, what are the trade-offs?
This was going to be my question. So what works for them? What does work mean? So what are the things that we should be considering in the trade-offs? Like people listening here is like, okay, I have now passed the first bar saying I don't need to choose one thing. If there's n things, I need to consider the n things, right? So I'm not part of the religious word that number one is the best one and that's it, right? So what are the criteria to understand, to kind of compare and contrast and figure out, for this particular use case, this is the best, what works the best for me?
I mean, it's a good question, right? Because ultimately it's about like what's valuable and useful. I mean, that's how, say, Bill Inman would define, what he's been trying to work on. Just is data valuable, and is it believable and useful? But The trade-offs, right? That's an interesting question. So how do we get to this situation in the first place? I could argue it's about the trade-offs, right? We're trading off time and efficiency and money and versus quality, rigor, and those sorts of things, right? So, and right now the pendulum is swung basically towards like fast, relaxed versus rigorous and formal. But what's interesting is if you go to Europe, for example, which I know, Juan, you've been there. I don't know about you, Tim, but Europe's a different ball game there. They move a lot slower business wise. They just do. And the thing is, data modeling there is much more rigorous and much more formal versus here, where people just move fast, break things. That's how we do things. It's a feature and a bug, but I think, you talk to data modelers or data practitioners in the States versus Europe, it's a much different, you get two different answers in terms of how you should do stuff. So I think it's a trade-offs really. Here, it's like people, if you talk to most analytics engineers or data engineers, like I don't have the time to think about modeling. I'm just going to make, say, one big table to your point, Tim, and that's how it's going to be. So I don't know. It's an interesting question.
The culture aspect here in countries, this is a very, very important one that you bring up. Like this would be interesting analysis to go do. Like just go on LinkedIn and look for people whose title called data modelers. I would believe that they would, I don't know, just apply the 80-20 rule. 80% would probably be in Europe.
I'd be willing to take that bet too. Yeah. Yep.
So
it's just a different culture over there. I mean, they're doing stuff like Datavault, for example, right? Which, I mean, I don't know very many people in the States that are doing that, but that's just, it's a great methodology, but it just requires a lot more work and a lot more investment. And it's just here, for whatever reason, the investment is more like, I just want to get an answer today. And that's maybe part of the problem, but that's a trade-off, like how accurate and how correct and how holistic you want to be versus just getting an answer out the door, right? I mean, in a recent podcast I did with Tristan Handy, shameless plug, the Joe Reis show, go check it out. It's on Spotify. But Tristan, he's the CEO of DBT Labs, right? And he's not blind to the fact that there's like DBT model sprawl everywhere. Like he pointed out a company that had 39,000 DBT models. And it's not like he said this is like awesome. He's like, yeah, this is a huge problem that we got to tackle because that's like 39,000 different, at least different concepts, maybe more, that are just somewhere in a data warehouse.
39 different things. And then those things are probably duplicated. Think about how it goes into semantics.
Bingo. Yes, exactly. So it's like, yeah. So he's saying, the complexity issue is definitely something that he's definitely thinking about and trying to tackle. And it's just, but this is what happens. One of my coach actually, my fitness coach, she is a data analyst as well, and she's telling me the other week, like, oh, I'm doing a data model. I'm like, oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. And when you say data model, like, what do you mean exactly? Right. And she's like, oh, I'm making DBT models. It's like, huh, that's interesting. And so to her, again, semantics, right? The term data model, even, it means a lot of things to different people. I wrote an article about this a few weeks ago, WTF as a model, right? Because it's like you have a machine learning model. So when I talk to machine learning practitioners, like, oh, I'm modeling right now. I'm like, okay, what do you mean by that? It's like, well, I'm making a machine learning model. Like, what do you mean, idiot? And so it's, I've talked to app developers. A model's a totally different thing too. I mean, it's in a lot of cases it's literally a model file, like in your ORM. So, but anyway, that's kind of the predicament that we're in right now. To answer your original question though, like, how do you know if you've done it right? I think it really does come down to given the trade-offs you have at hand and the constraints, what would you define as a success? I think it's the only way you could really answer that, because you couldn't just say, well, it has to achieve the highest ROI, for example. Because I'm like, well, but in this case, you probably justified to yourself that you just did that. So it's like, I don't think you want to achieve the lowest ROI outcome. So
yeah, well, there's some obvious. There's the obvious truth. Oh, we want to make money, right? All that stuff, right? But
yeah.
But then it gets much more profound here.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are you thinking, Tim?
Well, I wanted to ask a question, which is that I think sometimes, especially in the US, when we talk about this sort of faster, more like I think we move the slider on the scale from efficiency to resilience. We love to slide that slider real high, real heavy on the efficiency end of that slider, right? And I don't see data teams spending a lot of time, first of all, thinking about modeling up front, right? But then not really spending time to refactor. And I think that there's an art to, okay, yeah, we're going to move fast. Maybe, let's just use the DBT scenario for a second, right? Oh, we've got 100 models now. Oh, shoot. Maybe it's time for us to go look and see how many of these models deal with customer, right? Oh, 10 of them do. Oh, shoot. Well, maybe we should have one customer model and be taking into account any dimensions or, supplementary tables and things like that need to support customer. So that way we're not having 10 customer DBT models, right? I don't know if you're seeing that problem too, Joe, and if that's something we need to solve, if it's a cultural problem.
So let me add to this and throw it to you how are we dealing with tech debt and data?
I kind of separate this into 3 categories, really. In the software land, it's easier because you have tech debt and sometimes data debt. But especially for data teams, you have 3 types of debt. You have tech debt, maybe pipeline debt, I don't know, infrastructure debt or whatever. Data debt, which I think more of kind of we're referring to, like how are you controlling the decay of your data over time? Because it will. Concepts will erode, and data will become less relevant, and so forth, or it'll just be plain wrong at some point. Or it might just disappear too. Anyway, I digress. Organizational debt takes into account basically when you start out as a data team. Picture this: you're given a punch pass, and you have 20 punches on this thing. And this is the amount of times you can erode trust in your group, right? So you get 20 screw ups basically. After the 20th screw up, I don't know what happens to you. Probably bad things. So this happens a lot with data teams, software teams too. But I think data teams, because there's more of a feedback loop with quote the business, right? So say this report's wrong. It's an obvious one. Yeah, it's a punch in your pass, right? Data's not available. Yeah, another punch in your pass, right? Keep accumulating these things. And so that's organizational debt that I think data teams incur with quote the business. And so, but what was the last point you hit on though, Juan?
Well, I was just asking, like, how are people dealing with data tech debt today, right?
Yeah,
data tech point is like, yeah, we got to refactor. Like, are people even thinking about refactoring and taking a pause? I mean, our engineering team, all engineering teams will go on, like, we're going to go do this stuff. We have a sprint, but we're going to put some time to refactor, to go look at the debt. And right, there's a week that we're going to go do this stuff. Like, is this happening?
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where it's kind of like all of us, I think, also say, especially at the beginning of the new year, that, yeah, I'm going to get my life in order and like really get on a plan. I'm going to exercise and eat keto and, really get on the ball, not drink as much. But about 3 weeks in, you're just like, yeah, whatever. That was hard. So I think that's a lot of teams really, right? When it comes to debt, it's like, yeah, I think that the ambitions are good. I don't think anyone has like malicious intent or inherently,
But is software like that?
Oh, software's like that for sure. Every software team I've worked on, it's definitely like that. You have your tickets, right? And I think the good teams definitely spend an amount of a certain amount of time like trying to chop down debt. Each sprint. Different teams have different ways of doing it. You have to be very intentional about it. But in data, it's interesting because you can actually mask over your debt by just making a new query and just say, oh, well, here's your answer to that. And so you didn't really change the situation. You just changed the output.
In data, you can mask over your debt by creating a new query. I would say in data, you can mask over the problem by creating a query, but you're creating more debt.
You just create more debt. Yeah, you create more debt, but it's like I say that I just need you to tweak this report though, right? Like I'm just going to add another filter to it, and like here's your report. So that's what I mean. It's like it didn't change the underlying fact that you got it wrong in the first place, and you didn't address the root cause of that, right? But you did address here's your answer to that question. So it's easy to sweep things under the rug. So it's interesting. Like I love DBT, for example. Another great tool is Looker. Looker, I'd argue, was one of the first popular semantic layers, so to speak. It was coupled to the BI, and I won't get into all that nitpicking on that. But the whole purpose of Looker was to define something once and use it anywhere, right? So just as you would in code, do not repeat yourself and so forth. And what was crazy is that I seen like LookML files that had so many duplicates and so much repetition and didn't take into account like dynamically scaling out the type of problem you're trying to solve, like you would if you're writing code, like conditionals and so forth. It was literally just copy and paste, change a filter there and so forth, instead of using conditionals and stuff like that, where it's just like, okay, so it was obvious that somebody asked you for something really quick, and you just need to get an answer like that quickly. And the other crazy thing is, like, Looker was supposed to be like the self-service layer, right? We're supposed to be able to do self-service analytics. The holy grail of analytics is self-serve. Everyone wants to do that. And lo and behold, so self-serve obviously means that the end user can just use a tool, get their analytics, and then you're done. Voila, right? Analysts can work on the definitions neatly and so forth, and the separation concerns are there. And all too often, what I would see also is that analyst is supposed to be working on building a better model. They're pinged on Slack probably and say, hey, I need you to make a report. Can you also send it to me in Excel? So right, so the whole situation is just bananas. But this is a reality that I see like quite often, actually. So yeah, so interesting world. Sometimes I figure maybe I should just go do like cattle ranching or something. That'd probably be more fun. So I don't know.
That's a topic for another podcast. If you were in data, what would you be doing? I think we can have good conversations on
that. Would have been a good icebreaker as well.
Yeah. But I want to bring up this comment here that Jefferson is sharing. Sprints are often the suppressor of good upfront modeling. Thoughts?
I think there's some truth. In fact, I was actually on a chatting with this Slack group of all these software engineers that I'm friends with, really hardcore ones too. And we got on the notion of like Scrums and Agile, really. And one guy was like, I really hate Scrum and Agile. And I was like, well, I think you probably hate how it's done, right? Because the essence of like Scrum, for example, that came out of like lean manufacturing that had actually nothing to do with software. It was applied in software, but it's something that came out of I think Toyota or maybe one of the lean people. But so it's interesting because the whole notion is to banish waste. That's all it is, right? What's interesting with sprints is that we actually it's a very wasteful activity in a lot of cases. So I think it's how you do your sprints is incredibly important. But I'd be more curious to dig into what he means by the suppressor of good upfront modeling and what he means by upfront modeling. It's the way I would imagine upfront modeling is, there's at least the way that you'd probably do it in the old times is there's a lot of requirements gathering, a lot of sitting down with people and stuff. And that's one thing I've been thinking about too, is maybe is there a better way of doing this in this day and age? Because I think that it's definitely more of a waterfall approach, which obviously would be kind of contradictory to the notion of a sprint. But some people like Larry Burns, for example, and John Giles and others definitely point towards the need for more agile data modeling, and I tend to subscribe to that viewpoint. But it's
so I think there's two things we should confuse them. One is like the modeling technique. You do why, and then what is the methodology of how you're using that technique, right?
Correct.
So it can be a waterfall approach, right? Boiling the ocean, you're getting all the requirements, and then we're gonna do this, right? Versus an agile methodology. So I think and then the methodology can be applied to whatever modeling technique that you want to go do, depending on whatever success you're having. So I think that one.
And it's interesting too. So one thing I would urge people to do is revisit the notion of data model patterns, especially when you're at the conceptual phase. Like this is something that have been advocated quite often with was it Len Silverson, for example? He had 3 books, fantastic books, the data model resource books, volumes 1 through 3, 2,000 pages of nothing but model patterns. And so if you're a retailer, for example, these patterns just lay out how does a retailer work? How do you think about all the entities in a retail model? Not just the entities, but stepping back, just like things that happen in a retail business, right? Things that those things happen to, right? You get a product, you sell it to a customer, right? These are all patterns, and these patterns still apply today. It's not like the world of retail has completely changed to the point where it's like you don't sell things to people anymore. Like that still happens. Like so, I think for to a large extent the just reusing patterns I think would maybe help with what Jefferson was saying here. with upfront modeling, because it does need to be faster. I think the big complaint was everything takes too damn long.
But,
right? And so
this is all about having existing industry models, like retail, right? You'll have the orders, customers, right? I've been doing insurance, some stuff, and you have claims and coverage details and underwriting. Like all these things are the same, and they shouldn't. They're not changing across the industry, across companies. The essence are there. But I think going back to the rigorous, like seeing that pendulum, you can see some folks being very pedantic of we have to go use this model as is, and I'm like,
right.
And then this is like where you fit. It's like, no, some people will be in that camp, and I'm like, just use it as an inspiration. Maybe magically, as it is, it works perfectly for you. Okay, perfect. Maybe 80% of it works. Maybe 20% of it works, or whatever. At least you're not starting from zero, not reinventing the freaking wheel.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. No, you're 1,000% spot on. I agree. It's like, take what works. Again, it's back to the mixed martial arts. Like, what applies to your situation? What do you need to tweak, right? Like if I'm in a mixed martial arts event, for example, I'm not going to sit there and try and do like a perfect triangle choke, if you know what that is. It's like I'm gonna like adapt to the situation and like nail it as best I can, knowing that the other guy on the other end is probably knowing what I'm doing and is going to try and get out. That's how reality works. And the thing is, business is slippery, especially these days. Things change quickly, but there are processes that probably don't change as much. So try and capture those and build around those things, right? And I think that's the whole point of this. Is it's just what we're doing right now is we just become so myopically focused on what's in front of us, directly in front of us for this hour. Even like I need to respond to this query. And the problem is we're losing the entire context of like what we're doing. With the business. And then if you extend it to data mesh between businesses, right? So it's a very fractal problem. But I do agree with Jefferson's initial comment, though. Sprints are often the suppressor of good upfront modeling. I tend to agree with that. I think sprints are also a suppressor of good upfront, a lot of things, not just modeling. So the way a lot of people do sprints is, I think, quite poorly done right now. So I've managed poor sprints before, so I know what I'm talking about. So I think we all have. I'm not going to say that I'm perfect. So
yeah, well, sprints can be something that folks get very religious about, also, right?
Oh yeah,
if you embrace agile software practices in data, but don't embrace thinking about business value and thinking about data products and how you're actually using agile data development to accomplish said value, then you're just being obsessed about a tool or an approach instead of the value you're actually trying to create.
Religion. Yeah, exactly. I mean, or philosophy, as one was yelling at me the other night about. I was just messing with one. I actually agree with him.
It was late. It was a Friday or Saturday, and I think it was 10, 11 p.m. for me, and I were having some drinks. I'm like, why is this such a problem? It's philosophy. So I was being philosophical myself already that night.
No, and I was like, yeah, he's right. I'm just going to mess with him. It is interesting though. You bring up some interesting points there too. We get so caught up in the dogma, really, and I think that especially now. Again, AI has so much opportunity to change businesses. And I think, change the way we do a lot of things. We really do need to capitalize on this moment and get our house in order. I think what's going to concern me is companies are going to throw large language models on top of their whatever, SharePoint. I'm just joking, but probably to that too. And it's going to be weird. So. You have two choices. You can assume that generative AI is outputting is correct, right? Or you can or maybe a third assumption. Actually, I was going to say the other one is like you can assume it's not, but you can see your data has been wrong the entire time too. Maybe that's also the case. So I don't know, but it's going to be an interesting world, and what I fear is that we're going to enter more of a hall of mirrors type situation in our businesses, where like nobody knows what's right. Whereas before, I think the original point about when we first started one, right, where it's like business people, they know their numbers. You show me a sales guy or saleswoman who doesn't know their sales number right now, right? Every salesperson knows their number. If they don't, they're out of a job. Like you know your number like the back of your hand. Like that is the one number you know. You know that probably better than like your kid's birthday or anything. Like you know where you are. So you know your business.
Yeah.
This is the key thing right there. Like people know. I mean, when we're using the word know here, it's knowledge.
Yeah. You harp on this all the time. It is knowledge. It's all it is at the end of the day, right? But I think you're right, though, and what you're saying earlier, where it's like I think it's more of the data people that we got it backwards. Like we need to focus on the business and talk to the business in ways that they understand. And another article I wrote was a business doesn't care about quote data, right? Because they don't. Go to a salesperson and talk about knowledge graphs, for example. They'll just look at you like I have no idea what you're talking about, unless you happen to sell knowledge graphs. They'll just say like, "Well, have a drink and sit down. We can talk about something else." So, like, look like you have a lot in your mind there, Juan. But that's the reality of it, right? I mean, most data people want to talk in terms of whatever we're trained to talk about and what we talk about amongst ourselves. But a lot of people don't live in our filter bubble,
Definitely.
So
yeah, I think before we go to our lightning round, is one of the biggest takeaways you think that folks should have is kind of going back to this mixed martial arts analogy, like learn the tools of the trade.
Yeah.
Figure out what they're good at and what they're optimized for and how to make the best of them. But really focus on modeling, especially in the advent of generative AI and how that's just going to amplify everything. Think about modeling more holistically and think of it in terms of right tools for the right job and really tie it back to the value that you're trying to drive.
I think that's beautifully put. Yeah. And, if you take the mixed martial arts approach, you can be awesome, like Mark Zuckerberg here, hanging out with the UFC champions. Yeah, it's so funny. I
don't know why I get such a kick off of this whole, Zuck versus Musk. What a crazy situation.
I just want to close out with one thing before we go to our lightning round.
It's crazy.
I think the generative AI, I started off with like, AI and now large language models, it's all about unstructured. We're not thinking about the tech, the structured data. And we're going to start putting these large language models with structured data running queries over our database. And my hypothesis here, I'm going to bet on this, is that we're going to start doing these chatting with the data and having all these natural language questions translated into SQL where our underlying, there's no understanding, no modeling, and it's just going to fall flat.
Mm-hmm.
And look at cycles in history. We've had AI winters, and this is something that we can kind of say, the promise of this stuff, but our most valuable data is our structured data, our analytical and transactional data, and we're not being able to leverage that with our AI, and that's where we're going to fall flat on
Bingo.
that. Now, the way my hypothesis is that the way that is not going to happen, we're actually going to succeed, where we can really leverage this, is putting the semantics, the knowledge.
Yep.
And I've actually already been doing these experiments. I'm writing a whole poster about a benchmark. So I'm creating this benchmark where it's input are just questions. The underlying database schema is a schema of an open, taking some industry model, like I'm working on insurance, stuff like that. And then, but it's going to be in the physical layer. It's not very clear semantics. So you're going to take your query, that's going to translate it to SQL. And it's going to work for small stuff, but more complex questions where you're actually going to get KPIs and metrics, it's going to fall flat and you're just going to invent stuff right there. And then put the semantic layer on top where we're going to have everything well-defined governance, all that stuff. I think that's where we're going to go see the difference. And we're going to have to shift from, we're going to be efficient on things and immediately we're going to fail. And it's going to be obvious because we're failing because the queries are giving just bad, not even compiling. That's how we're immediately going to fail. And then we're going to find that pendulum. So that's my hypothesis. I'm betting on this right now.
I totally agree. It's interesting too. I know we're coming up on time. You want to do the lightning round, but it's interesting because I feel like we're in a classical machine learning winter right now. So my friends and I would joke back when deep learning came out that we were in a SVM, support vector machine winter, because that's what we used to work on. And now we're in if it's not LLMs, right? You're in the non-LLM winter right now. So it'll be back though. I mean, a lot of these techniques, they still hold weight. They're still awesome. It's just different tools for different jobs. It's all they are.
This gives us, let's hit our lightning round. And our first question, Let's keep it quick yes or no's.
Yep.
Number one, are the past principles around data modeling out of date?
No.
Perfect.
Just a quick yes or no. So,
well, I want to ask 1B to that though. What about for things like streaming, for example? Like, are there parts of the data modeling approaches which are underexplained, underfleshed out?
I think streaming needs to be fleshed out in general in terms of data modeling. Everybody I've talked to, people have built like the big streaming systems. Nobody has a consensus on streaming data modeling right now. Nobody.
Okay.
That's wide open territory.
All right, that resonates with me too.
Mm-hmm.
Second question: data architects versus data and analytics engineers. Are data and analytics engineers the future keepers of the model?
Yes.
Quickly expand on that one.
Okay. I just think the roles are becoming more and more close to the metal, so to speak. Right. I think the notion of a data architect, unless you're at a larger company, that they don't exist anymore.
Okay, this is good. So data architects in larger companies, data engineers, analytics are going to be the owner for smaller companies.
More full stack data engineer type folks, right?
All right.
Yeah, just because you have to. Yeah.
So next question, as organizations look to take their own knowledge and data and combine it with generative AI, whether custom LLMs or small LLMs, will semantics and modeling be the biggest barrier to value?
Absolutely. Yep. 100%. For a reason we just discussed. Yeah. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. Fourth question.
Yep.
We talked about sprints and iteration around data towards the end of our chat today. Mm-hmm. Can data modeling happen iteratively in sprints?
It can, and it needs to. And so I think we need to reevaluate how we're doing modeling right now. I think that's part of the crux. I think we need to figure out how that fits into the reality that it's going to be part of a sprint. We aren't getting rid of sprints. We'll get rid of data modeling before we get rid of sprints.
And this is my book, and I have a whole chapter on how to do it iteratively modeling.
Oh, nice. I'll go get your book. I need an autograph version of that too. So
I need you to autograph my version of your book.
We'll make this happen. Okay.
All right. Tim, take us away first with takeaways.
All right. So we first started off by just kind of mentioning your book, Fundamentals to Data Engineering, and also us getting together while we were all in Vegas with beers in hand and talking about the state of data and the advent of generative AI. And one of the things that you had mentioned, both in live when we were chatting, but also today in our session today, was that a lot of folks, when they saw your book, you had sort of like one chapter around data modeling. And some folks were kind of asking, well, why is that kind of there, in the first place? And then other people were asking, why only one chapter? This is so important. Like, there's so much more that needs to be said around modeling, especially in the advent of things like generative AI, which are going to take all of our data issues and our opportunities and simply amplify them. And I think it's exciting and interesting that you're going to be digging more into that and be writing a book around that. Yep. And you had mentioned that the art and the philosophy of data modeling in general has been lost. And we aren't ready for AI. And there's a huge fundamental opportunity to get the foundation right, so that the promise of AI can be real. And maybe we can head off this winter that we may be destined for around LLMs if God can save us on it. And if we can take proper data engineering and data modeling and in general data practices to it. You also mentioned about tying different types of knowledge and information together. And you mentioned, for example, Bill Inman, right? Everybody knows him as being a maven and one of the godfathers around relational database modeling and the enterprise data warehouse. And right now he's focused a ton on text. And I'll throw in a comment for myself. It's been interesting to watch the career of Bob Muglia, the former CEO over at Snowflake. And now he's obsessing over text and unstructured data and knowledge graphs, right? And it's the marriage of these things together that's going to be really interesting. And so we have to be honest about, you had mentioned, we have to be honest about all the work that's going to take to get from here to there. Yep. You mentioned a talk you gave recently in Vancouver, Data Modeling is Dead, Long Live Data Modeling. We've really kind of lost our way around having a coherent model around data. Models tend to be aligned these days more towards the form, the web UI, and that kind of dictates a lot of the model. Also, ad hoc requests are dictating the model quite a bit and how we're approaching modeling. And really, we need to zoom out. We need to not be religious about it. We need to think about all of these modeling approaches as tools in the toolkit. Relational database modeling using Kimball. Maybe that's Brazilian jiu-jitsu, but you can't just focus on the one art, right? You gotta focus on everything and use it together. There's no one true way, and these are just different tools that you have to bring together. You got to know what to look for. You got to focus on value.
Bingo.
And there was a lot more there, but Juan, I'll pass it over to you for your takeaways.
Thank you. Good job.
The trade-offs, right? We're discussing like, make sure it works for you. So what does work mean? Like, first of all, you have to find what success looks like. So to figure that out, and I think usually the pendulum goes into like being very efficient as fast as possible versus kind of the quality and being more rigorous. And I think this pendulum swings is now right now generally more on the efficiency side, but it's very cultural, right? If you look at, I love looking at this. If you look at the EU, right? People do business, they're a bit slower about that stuff, how they do business. So they kind of really take their time, and they're focusing more on being the rigorous part, right? So I think it's always like, do you want to get an answer as fast as possible out the door versus being more rigorous? So I think this is being able to understand the trade-offs, and that's what you need to be able to go look into. Yeah. I also very quickly discuss on like, what is a model? Like everybody uses the word. ML models are different from data models, different from DBT models, and app developers have their own models, which can be even the model file. So like, we got to go figure out which model. Talk about semantics here, right? Talk about debt, right? So are you refactoring? How are you dealing with this data tech debt? You said 3 types of debt. I like this. Tech debt, which is like, you got pipeline infrastructure debt. You have data debt, which is like the decay of data. I mean, concepts will erode, just become completely wrong, or they'll disappear. And the organizational debt. And I love the analogy you brought up, like that punch card. Like you can only punch that card 20 times, right? You can only screw up 20 times. After that, like, who knows, right? So the report didn't arrive on time, punch card right there. So, and the other issue is that in data, you can mask over debt with another query. And I think what part of the debt is that you want to not repeat yourself. Just do it once and do it once. And Looker was this whole approach, but when you actually look into that stuff, you would still see so much repetition. So it's like, we don't really learn this stuff in data. We're not seeing it. And then kind of wrapping up, are there other ways or better ways of doing modeling? I think one of the stuff is look at the different methodologies. We can and should do better when you look at different methodologies, looking at different modeling patterns, and reuse existing patterns to figure out if you won't reuse them as is, you can be inspired to go take parts of it. At the end of the day, just be pragmatic about it. Bottom line, right tools for the right job.
Love it.
Anything we missed? How do we do?
Fantastic, guys. It's like you've done this before for 4 years now. So
part of our 4th one. Hey, we took a month off.
And Joe, you're the perfect guest to have here twice, because I think you've got a wealth of knowledge, and we're just so glad you could join us today.
Anytime, guys.
Joe, take us home quickly. Advice about data, about modeling, about life. Who else should we invite next? And any new resources that you want to share that you follow, that people should follow?
Who should you invite next? I think Ethan, Aaron, and Kevin Hu, and those guys would be amazing to have on.
Ethan's coming soon.
Cool. Yeah. There's a lot of people. And I'm sure I'll have some more. I'm about to start another world tour in a few weeks, so I'm sure I'll be able to recommend a lot more people that I want to recommend people off the beaten path. I think there's like the LinkedIn kind of filter bubble, but there's a lot of interesting people I meet who you probably haven't heard of before. A guy, John Giles, would be fascinating for you to have on the show. His last name's Giles. Yes, he's in Australia. He's amazing. He's like Yoda when it comes to data modeling. You would love him. I think he lives in rural Australia as well, so he probably literally lives in Dagobah. But people like that are cool. Larry Burns is another guy I would have on. So, yeah, he's dope.
By the way, why is there so much modeling in Australia? That's another question.
I don't know. It's a weird thing. Yeah.
Gary Payne.
I'm looking at several books. It's like, Graham Simpson. There's all these books I have from Australians. I don't know what it is in the Outback or something. Must be a teacher about modeling. So.
Yeah. Where can people find you? You're going off and doing to your next events, like.
Yeah. So I'll be, you can find me on Substack. I'm at joereis@substack.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just add me there. Apart from that, this upcoming, I'll be in Australia, Europe, Middle East, maybe India, maybe again Canada, and also on tour with DBT and Joe Reis Roadshow, hitting a city near you. Next one's in Atlanta on the 10th, I believe, and then Seattle and I think a few other cities as well. So, yep.
Joe, thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
It's been a pleasure. Next week we are going to be. I'm going to be at CDOIQ in Boston. And
nice.
Tom Redman, who's the data doc. We're going to have him live right before we do our Honest No BS dinner. If you happen to be in Boston, you want to get I think we're actually booked. So, but hey, if you want to join our dinner, let me know. Maybe the seat opens.
That's at MIT, right? CDIOQ.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's not MIT officially anymore, but anyways.
Okay.
It's an awesome event. All right, Joe, thank you so much.
All right.
A little bit over.
See you guys.
More stuff to go do.
No worries.
Cheers, Joe.
All right. Thanks, everybody.